Hello everyone, welcome to the latest Edinburgh Fortean Society. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gordon Rutter and I organise these events. We're hoping to meet again face to face when circumstances allow, but we will try and maintain some sort of web presence as it's been so popular. So thank you everyone for attending these events, and we'll allow you to continue to do so in the future. What we're going to have a look at tonight is a purely self-indulgent talk, and I make no apologies for that. It is quite simply an entire history of the Edinburgh Fortean Society. It's in multiple parts, so it's not the entire history tonight. So basically what we've got is we've got a part work that over time will build up into a complete history of the Edinburgh Fortean Society. For subscribers, there is of course a free folder to keep all of your issues in, and the first issue is only £1.99. Subsequent issues will be more expensive, and we'll make them go on to like 1,000 different episodes or something. You all know the type of part work I'm talking about. It's not going to be something like that. I'm going to put together a few of these videos just to give people an idea of the history of what we've done, and there may be some talks that people see and think, oh, that was good, and we could potentially get those talks back for the future, because there's quite a lot of people who've never seen any of the earlier talks, so there's that opportunity is there. I'd like to thank everyone who's come tonight. I'd like to thank everyone who's watching it. And of course, I'd like to thank everyone who has contributed over the years to the entire history of the Edinburgh Fortean Society. So I'll just start sharing my screen, and I will resist the urge to say, can you all see it? So there we are, folks. The Edinburgh Fortean Society, a history. Part 1. The before times. So there was, believe it or not, a time before the Edinburgh Fortean Society actually started, and that time was early 1999, and the place was the Claremont Bar here in Edinburgh. Of course, the Edinburgh Fortean Society started in Edinburgh. For those of you who don't know the Claremont Bar, it looked a little bit like that. It no longer exists. There is still a pub in that location, but we're now a couple of iterations on from the Claremont. For those of you who don't know me, confession time, I am a Doctor Who fan, and the Edinburgh Doctor Who group used to, once upon a time, meet at the Claremont Bar every Monday evening. And I knew one or two people in the Edinburgh Doctor Who group were also into the Fortean side of things. So one night, started having a conversation with people about Forteana rather than Doctor Who. And as the chat progressed, other people were joining in the chat as well, not just the ones that I'd known who were specific Forteans. And by the end of the evening, how about we form a group and we meet and we have chats about Forteana? And people said that seemed like a good idea. So I popped down to the bar, said, we'd like to book the upstairs room for meetings. Yep, no problem, they say at the bar. What is your group called? Hadn't actually thought that far. So standing at the bar, humming and hawing, and they say at the bar, what's it about? Well, it says, talk about Fortean topics, right? And it's taking place in Edinburgh. Yeah, okay, so Edinburgh Fortean. Let's make it sound classy. So we'll call it the Edinburgh Fortean Society. So the fact that the group is named the Edinburgh Fortean Society actually was not anything that was consciously thought of. It was just a quick discussion at the bar, because we had to call it something when we wrote it in the diary for booking it. So we booked it, and the original booking was for the start of April in 1999. And there were a number of people there who said they would come along. And some of those people are on this slide. So actually, on that slide, we've only got two people, the two people at the back, myself and Martin Rogerson, who were at the original meeting. The next two people in the group, they subsequently attended Edinburgh Fortean Society meetings, and the chap closest to the camera, I'm afraid he did not attend any Edinburgh Fortean meetings, so he's actually there just as a person who happened to be in that particular photograph. So April, we had a meeting, and we had the upstairs room of the Claremont Bar booked. And that first meeting, it seemed reasonable to tell people about who Charles Fort was. As I say, some people knew. Our host of this particular Zoom meeting is Stu Smith, and he was one of the people I knew was into the fortune side of things, because I'd first met Stu through an email list, if anyone remembers those sorts of things, about Forteana. And we discovered we were both in Edinburgh. We discovered we both liked Doctor Who, and Stu came along to the Doctor Who group. I think the first time I actually met him face to face was a talk I gave on fungi at the Royal Botanic Garden here in Edinburgh. And Stu, I say, was at the very first meeting. So he's one of the few, not the only one, but he's one of the few who is still attending. So that first meeting was on Charles Fort, the man and his work. And it basically consisted of a group of about half a dozen of us sat around a table in the top of the Claremont Bar. And I introduced people to the idea of Fort and gave a little bit of an indication of who he was and what he'd done and why I was interested in him and why I thought a Fortean Society would be a good idea. And the rest of the meeting basically consisted of reading the introduction written by Bob Ricard, editor and founder of Fortean Times magazine. So reading the introduction that he'd written to this particular version of the Book of the Damned. And that was actually really nice because it gave people a clear idea of the scope of things that we'd potentially look at, and the fact that Forteans weren't necessarily believers, they were just people who were interested in these phenomena, people who collected the damned data, as it were. So that was how we started, with a meeting about Charles Fort. And at that time, we were pretty much making things up as we went along. So usually at meetings, we would get people who would volunteer to give the next talk. So there was no forward planning. There was no knowing who was going to be giving the talk in general until sort of the meeting before. So we were doing it a month at a time kind of thing. And the first talk after our introductory talk was in May, surprise, surprise, and that was Rosslyn Chapel, an enigma inside a mystery, and that was myself and Scott Russell. Scott came all the way over from Glasgow for the meetings, so it was quite a haul for him. But one of the advantages was, of course, he got some excellent talks about Forteana, and also we were meeting in a pub, so it can't be all bad. That's one of the things about the Edinburgh Fortean Society. I've always felt it's important that we actually do meet in a pub, because as well as the talks, the interactions between people, and also the chance to just sit and relax and have a nice drink is, I believe, an important part of the whole group. So from that, you can see that we are a very, very informal group in total. Scott, I'd known also from the Forteana email list that I met Stu through, and Scott and I discovered that we had a love and an interest in Knights Templar, Rosslyn Chapel, and all of that sort of thing. And a year or two previously, we'd actually given a talk to the Fortean Times Unconvention about Rosslyn Chapel, so this was just a rehash of that particular talk. So we spoke about some of the factual history, some of the things that we know about Rosslyn Chapel, and we also spoke about some of the myths and legends that had grown up about this place. I'm trying to remember when the Da Vinci Code came out. I can't remember if this was pre-Da Vinci Code or not. However, even if it was pre-Da Vinci Code, there was still quite a lot of shall we be polite and say unsubstantiated history associated with the chapel, and the Da Vinci Code has popularized some of that, and you know, people are still thronging to it. The particular photograph we've got here is showing the chapel as it was undergoing some of the restorations. When I first went to Roslin Chapel in about 1996, I think it was, there was a complete dome over the top of the roof. Subsequently, a set of steps were put up there, which gave you an absolutely unprecedented view of the roof and the carvings that were present up there. So that was a really, really good thing to see. And this talk, as I say, changing my tack here, did predate the Da Vinci Code, because Stu Smith has just reminded me that it was 2003 the Da Vinci Code came out. So here we are, Edinburgh Fortean Society, way ahead of the popular times. One of the things about going to Roslin pre-Da Vinci Code was you could actually get a chance to see it. You would largely have it to yourself. You know, so it was fantastic. You could get in and you could see all of these wonderful carvings. Once the Da Vinci Code took off big time, the numbers went up 10, 20-fold. It was absolutely phenomenal. For the trust, it was a brilliant thing because obviously it brought in a lot of money, which allowed them to complete the restorations. And if you visit Roslin Chapel now, you'll see that all of the material that we can see here is completely down. You've got complete access to it. For those of you who've never been to Roslin Chapel, I would urge you to go. There is a wealth of carvings in there. Unfortunately, the carvings are not as clear as you would imagine, because when you get inside, there was a 1950s attempt at restoration of the chapel and preserving the material, and what they did was they basically put a cement wash over all of the carvings. In other words, all of these beautiful, intricate, detailed carvings have had their lines blurred by the application of cement. Interesting fact, if you want to see what the carvings looked like originally, if you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, they've actually got a replicas section in the basement where they have a plaster cast of part of Roslin Chapel. So you can see the carvings there as they would originally have been shown. So Scott and I spoke about Roslin Chapel. As I say, we spoke about the definitive history, the definite history that we do know, but we also discussed some of the various legends that are associated with it as well. Some of the more fanciful ones, some of the ones that have been adopted by the Da Vinci Code, and so on and so on. So a wealth of stories that could be told about that place. We then moved on, but still sticking with myths and things of that nature. And our next talk was entitled The Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And I admit I was the one who chose the title when the speaker said that's what he wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about King Arthur. And I chose the title because, quite simply, I am a prog rock fan, and that allowed me to call it after one of Rick Wakeman's splendid albums. So Mark Parry gave us a talk there. Mark had not attended any of the meetings before, so his only visits to the group were when he was giving talks. No problems with that. More than happy for people to just pop along and give us a talk. Very, very happy for that. So, you know, it does what it says on the can there. There are a heck of a lot of myths and legends about these guys, and Mark just gave us a whistle-stop tour of some of the more famous versions. So he touched on Mort d'Arthur by Thomas Mallory and things like that. He also touched on some of the various versions of the stories that have been told, not just in books, but he spoke about some of the films and TV series. So things like Arthur of the Britons from the BBC in the early 70s, and the Martin Bowman film as well, which is a rather splendid film to watch. So prog rock, that's the only prog rock appearance in this entire talk, I guarantee it. We then moved on to another Fortean staple, which was urban legends. And this was Scott Russell flying solo on this one. And this is, again, perhaps based on Fortean Times Unconvention appearance, because I think I'm correct in saying that when Scott and I were talking at Uncon, the author of this particular book, Jan Harold Brundvand, he gave an excellent talk on urban legends, and that sparked Scott's interest in that topic, and he decided to, research it a bit further, and he gave us a whistle-stop tour of some of the most well-known urban legends and a little bit about the history of those, because just because something is an urban legend doesn't mean it's not true. And one thing that happened in that particular evening is we thought, wouldn't it be fun to start our own urban legend? And we did. And I have genuinely had that urban legend repeated back to me as fact. Am I going to tell you what that urban legend we made up was? No, I'm not, because I'm still watching it spread. I've not heard it for quite a while, but it's still out there, and I just want to see if it's still got any sort of legs. Is that somebody threatening to tell what the talk is there? Oh, Stu has completely forgotten. Haha, I could make anything up I wanted, Stu, and you would be none the wiser. So there we have a few of the early talks that the Edinburgh Fortean Society took. And at this time, we had no idea how long the group would last, how long it would take off for, what would happen to it. It was just a bunch of friends, all of whom knew each other before the group started, or most of which who knew each other before the group started, but I knew everybody. And we had no idea where it was going to go. And in one sense, we were a little naive, because what we did was we booked the Claremont Bar upstairs for our next meeting after the Urban Legends talk, and the next meeting would be the August meeting. So we've just tried to book a pub for August in Edinburgh. I'm sure you can see the problems there. So we arrived at the pub fully expecting to give the talk, and yeah, sure enough, the pub was absolutely full of people, including all of the space that we had booked. And the owners of the pub just went, yeah, tough. They didn't really care, to be honest. Would have thought they might have said something to us when we booked it and said, we'll have it for August as well. So we were left with a talk without a venue. So quick bit of thought, and we found a venue. And that venue was Drummond Community High School, which was where I was actually working at the time, which is why I knew it so well. Or was I? Actually, I'm not sure if I was working there at the time. Anyhow, I did know it as a location because I used to walk past it. And as I say, this was August, and the church we can see in the middle of that photograph, there is actually a cutout area just below there that you can't see. And at the time, that area used to be a pop-up bar during the Fringe. So what we did was we retired to the bar there to get our drinks, and then we hopped over the fence. They had a ladder. They had steps to get you over the fence. It was an official thing. And this area where you can just see some basketball courts, that area was being used as drinking area for the pub. So we managed to get a few tables in that area, and we held the talk in that location. And I can remember the date. I've got a spreadsheet with all the dates and all the information on, but this is one that I do not need to look at to remember exactly the date. Because when we decided to start the Fortean Society, one of the things we thought would be a good laugh is if we held the meetings on a Friday, and we chose the second Friday of the month, because if we did that every so often, we would have a meeting on Friday the 13th. And this was our first meeting on Friday the 13th. Consequently, we decided to have a talk by me on luck and superstition. And as I say, our luck was such that we weren't actually able to get into the venue we'd booked. So a little bit bad luck there, but we still managed to get some drinks, and we still managed to have the talk. And in that talk, I spoke about just a few superstitions and a few ideas about luck. One of the things I mentioned was the origin, or one of the supposed origins of Friday the 13th, which was related to the Knights Templar, because they were rounded up on Friday the 13th of October in 1307. So some of the Templars managed to get away, hence Friday the 13th, unlucky for some. So we spoke about that and just had a wee chat. And then we had a bit of a gap. I'm not entirely sure why, but there are no more talks for the rest of the year. So this is August. So September, October, November, we didn't have a talk. But in December, we did have something. It wasn't technically a solo Edinburgh Fortean Society event, because we held it jointly with the Edinburgh Doctor Who group, because it seemed sense to do so, because a majority of the members of the Edinburgh Fortean Society were also members of the Edinburgh Doctor Who group. So it made sense to have our Christmas meal joint with the Edinburgh Who group in the Claremont Bar. So much fun was had by all, as you can imagine. And that then brings us on to the year 2000. And in 2000, we had, in January, we had our first talk from one of our regular speakers, who is still appearing and still talking at the Society now. And I've already mentioned him several times. And this was Stu Smith, talking about Shetland Island myths and legends. It's not all sheep. Now, I suspect Stu may pull me up and say it should just be Shetland myths and legends. It's not all sheep, rather than Shetland Islands. But I am damn sure that's the title that I was actually given by Stu. That's the title I've got written down in all my documentation. And, that's what I'm going.
Do you want me just to clarify this?
Please do. Please do.
So Shetland Islands or Shetland Isles, but never the Shetlands.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right.
So
that's the problem.
Yeah. The one it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Shetland, but yeah.
Okay. I knew there was a wrong way to say it, and I knew I occasionally said it, and I just got myself confused. So I apologize for that. So Shetland Island myths and legends, it's not all sheep. So I put up a Shetland sheep there as well to remind us about the fact it's not all sheep, although it mostly is. Stu has subsequently given an updated version of this, simply because there is so much folklore from this area that can be talked about. And I'm not sure if one of those is on video or not. I can't recall. But I'm sure Stu can possibly be persuaded to give another version of this talk in the future, if anyone does. I'm not going to say much about this, other than it was just an introduction to this particular topic. I can't recall exactly which tales were told there, but on Stu's recommendations, I have bought one or two books that cover some of the areas and some of the stories there. And it's just an absolute wealth of stories, of folklore, and I hope one day to be able to visit it. We have another one of our founder members, but this particular gentleman is no longer attending any meetings. And because of the nature of the talks that he was given, he was eventually dubbed the Master of Disaster. And this is Martin Rogerson. And his first talk here was on one of his pet subjects, which was the sinking of the Titanic. But he didn't just look into the Titanic, he looked at the two other ships that were made at the same time, the Olympic and the Britannic. They were the White Star Liners, top of the range models, if you like. And Martin pointed out the problems that all three ships suffered from. The most famous one, of course, is the Titanic, which never made it across from its inaugural journey. but the others had checkered pasts as well. And there are also stories, which Martin alluded to in this talk, that in fact it was the Olympic that was substituted for the Titanic. So the ship that sank on its way to America was not the ship that was originally destined to be the Titanic. It was the Olympic, because so many things had gone wrong with that ship. So the White Star liners were trying to get rid of the evidence, if you like. There is no real evidence for that other than a conspiracy theory, because when you look at the ships and you know what you're looking for, there are subtle differences between them. He also told us the story of Margaret Jessup, who had the unenviable record of being present on all three ships when they sank, and obviously survived all three as well. So she was a nurse and survived the sinking of all three ships, and I think nobody else in the world can lay claim to that. Interesting fact about the ships, as you can see on the photographs there, they've all got 4 funnels, but the 4th funnel is purely decorational. It's a non-functional funnel. So if you ever see a film or anything and you see steam coming out of all 4 funnels, just look at them in pity and, you know, bemoan the fact that they've not done their proper homework. Another founder member of the Edinburgh Fortean Society, and consequently another Doctor Who fan as well, was Simon Knight. And one of Simon's interests was the Jack the Ripper murders. And this is the first of several talks that Simon gave on Jack the Ripper. And Simon, as well as talking very knowledgeably about these topics, also talked for a very long time. I think I'm correct in saying that this particular talk took 3 hours. Normally, nowadays, our talks tend to be 1 hour or so. But Simon definitely holds the record, not just for this one, but for some of his other talks as well, for pure length of a single talk. Don't get me wrong, all of the talks were excellent and packed full of information. And in the case of the Jack the Ripper murders, they were, of course, packed full of rather gory photographs of some of the victims. Simon looked at some of the various people who have been put forward as possible suspects for the Ripper murders, and at the end of it came to the conclusion of, we don't know. This far on, we're never likely to know, and if we ever do find out, chances are everyone will just go, who? And it probably won't be any of the ones that we've ever heard the names of as potential Jack the Ripper suspects. For the next talk, we then moved from having a specific talk and one person leading that talk, showing us at this time slides rather than PowerPoint presentations. We moved from that format to just a simple round table discussion. So we all sat around a table, still in the Claremont at this point, and we talked about ghosts. We swapped ghost stories, we shared our famous ghost images, and we talked about ghosts that we ourselves may have seen. And this is one of my own personal favorite images. I've got 3 or 4 favorite ghost images, but the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, which is what this is, it's one of my favorite ones, simply because I think when I was a child reading up on Forteana, before I'd ever heard of Charles Fort, this was one of the standard images that you'd find in all of the books on the subject. So we had a roundtable discussion on ghosts, and that wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't just a random choice. That was specific because the next talk, which at this point had been booked in a little bit earlier than previous ones, was going to be a talk on The Haunting of the Playhouse Theatre by Liam Rodden. Liam is currently the entertainment editor for the Evening News, and at this time, 2000, he was working for the Evening News. I don't think he was entertainment editor at that point. If he was, I apologize, but he was definitely doing a lot of reviews and writing a lot of articles, and that included writing an article on ghosts of the Playhouse. So he went and researched this article and then offered, it was published in the paper, and he offered to give us a talk as well. And one of the benefits for me of this particular talk was Liam said, "Oh, I need some photographs to illustrate the talk. Gordon, could you take the photographs for me?" Because he knew I was into photography. And I said, "Yes, of course, no problem." And that meant that Liam, myself, and the press officer went into the Playhouse Theatre, and we went backstage. We went to all the bits that you can't normally get to in that particular theatre, and we basically had free reign of the entire theatre, and it was absolutely fantastic. I got some fantastic views. They're on slides, pre-digital for me at least, and they're on slides, and I've still got them. I should transfer them onto digital at some point, but you know, they're views from inside that theatre that I've never seen anyone take before. One of them, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but one of them would have had health and safety going a little bit spare. So we'll move rapidly on from that, because we had a return from Mark Parry, who this time was talking to us about the mystery of UFOs. Now, over the entire history of the Edinburgh Fortean Society, people have come and gone as attendees, which, you know, of course, is only right. You're not forced to remain and keep going. People like Stu, who's with us tonight, has seen a lot of the talks, but for various reasons, he's missed quite a few. Simon Knight has seen quite a lot, missed more than Stu. And then there's myself. I'm probably, you know, we're probably the three who are still most active from the original days. I have not seen every single Edinburgh Fortean Society talk. This is the first talk that I did not see, The Mystery of UFOs by Mark Parry. It's not because I dislike UFOs, it's simply I had another engagement that evening and I was not able to attend the talk. I think I've only missed 2 Edinburgh Fortean Society events in total. To find out which the other one was, you'll have to watch all of these history talks. So that's Mark Parry talking about UFOs. I cannot comment any more than that because, as I say, I was not there. So we stuck with things that were flying in the air for the next talk, and we went with Martin Rogerson, our master of disaster, and he looked at the Hindenburg, a pop flop. And as well as telling us the story of the Hindenburg and showing us the film that I'm sure everybody has seen about the Hindenburg, he also demonstrated some ways that it could have burst into flames so quickly. Martin's day job is still that of a chemistry teacher. So he used his chemistry teacher skills and actually produced a piece of material similar to the material that was forming the balloon of the Hindenburg. And he coated it in the same materials that the Hindenburg was coated in, aluminium powder, and so on. And of course, the Hindenburg had a metal frame. And what he had basically done with this piece of cloth and the various bits that were associated with it, he had made a bit of thermite. And for any of you who've ever seen the thermite reaction, it's rather a spectacular exothermic reaction. Exothermic, it gives out a lot of heat. So if you've got a skin of a dirigible that is covered in a material which is part of the components of thermite, and you've got the rest of the components of thermite there, and you have some sort of ignition, it could be possible for the whole thing to go up incredibly quickly. Because, as I say, we do have film of the Hindenburg disaster, and we can see how quick the whole thing was consumed by fire. You can see how bright the fire is, how harsh it is, just from that photograph there. So, you know, it does sound a reasonable guess there. The thing to remember about the Hindenburg is, yes, people did die, but compared to a modern plane crash, there were a large number of people who just simply got off and were able to walk away and were totally unhurt. So we now move on to another talk by Stu, and this is looking at conspiracy theories. Stu, can you remember what you looked at? I'm putting you totally on the spot there. Didn't warn you about this.
Yeah, it was kind of an A to Z, I think, of conspiracy theories based on I think a book that Robert Anton Wilson had published recently. So probably Illuminati were in there and things like that, which is always good. I think reading that sort of stuff and being into the Discordians and things like that at the time, it's kind of like an inoculation against getting roped into conspiracy theories. You can always see where the holes are, probably.
Brilliant. So a talk on conspiracy theories so that you don't get drawn into conspiracy theories. Excellent. A public service. Thank you very much, Stu. So we then move back to Simon, and again, one of his pet subjects, and this was the curse of the Pharaohs, as we can see from the title there. So he was talking about the various curses that are associated with Tutankhamun. Talked a little bit about the boy king's life and his some of the ideas about how he actually died, and then he spoke about the various curses that were supposedly in action when Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered. So there are things like, for example, the fact that when the tomb was opened, Cairo, the electricity all went down. Well, apparently in the early 1920s, the electricity supply in Cairo going down was actually pretty much a daily occurrence. What would have been more spooky was if the electricity had not gone down. Other tales, such as Lord Carnarvon, who funded the expedition, dying shortly after the opening of the tomb. Well, he'd been bitten by a mosquito, and he opened the wound from the bite of that mosquito whilst shaving, whilst he was in Egypt. It became infected, and he died of that infection. And he was, at that point, something in the order of 80 years old. If there had truly been a curse of the Pharaohs, then surely Howard Carter, the man credited with the discovery and the first man to enter the tomb, he would have been one of the key figures to have died in that curse. But after the discovery of the tomb, Howard Carter lived quite a long time afterwards, so he certainly didn't suffer from it. And there are some modern versions of the curse of the Pharaohs as well. Such as when the mask that we can see here was being transported to a museum in London, to the British Museum in London, in fact. The story goes that what the army were the ones who were responsible for carrying it, because no commercial carriers would risk it because of the priceless nature of the relic here. And one of the soldiers kicked the box containing the pharaonic mask here, and ridiculed the whole thing, the whole idea of the curse. And of course, what happened a week later? He broke the very same leg whilst playing football. So Curse of the Pharaohs must be true. So again, another 3 hours from Simon there, but again, excellent storytelling. We then move to myself for the November 2000 talk, and this was Scottish Cryptozoology, an overview. So it was just kind of looking at some of the different things that have been talked about within Scotland as potential cryptozoology creatures. So things like, of course, the Loch Ness Monster, but we also had things like the Blue Men of the Minch. We had Selkies. We had all sorts of things like that. And yes, we did even have our first appearance of the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui there as well. So just an overview of some of the different things that we can find in Scotland as potential cryptozoological beasties. And then we moved on to our second Christmas meal. And again, this was in conjunction with the Edinburgh Doctor Who group. So, still meeting with those guys. Looking at that picture there, it looks suspiciously like I've actually got a can of Ein Brew in my hand there. So we then came on to 2001, the future, as far as I'm concerned. And the first talk of 2001 was myself, and I was talking on, as you can see here, the Shroud of Turin. it's again, like some of the other things I've mentioned, it's something that I've always been interested in. It's something I've always been aware. And one of the reasons for giving this particular talk at this time was in 2000, I'd actually visited Turin and I'd gone to see the shroud itself. The shroud is not normally on display. But every so often it is brought out and shown to the faithful. And in 2000, it was the 2000th anniversary since the birth of Christ, and consequently they decided to have an exposition of the shroud. It had only been 3 or 4 years since the last one. So actually, when I went to Turin to see it, expecting massive crowds, they were not there, simply because those who'd been crazy to actually get a chance to see it had already seen it in 1997. So there was not the massive rush that had been expected. So when I got there, instead of standing for hours in queues trying to get in, I had a pre-booked ticket, but even then you still had to stand in queues. I was able just pretty much to walk straight in. And actually, several times later during the trip to Turin, I was able just to wander in without a ticket because there were so few people viewing it. Please don't take it from me that there was nobody viewing it. There were quite a lot, but nothing compared to the numbers that they were looking at. So as well as talking about my own experience of the shroud, I actually had my own replica of the Shroud of Turin, which I made myself for a talk for the Fortean Times Unconvention. I've still got the replica somewhere, not entirely sure where it is, but basically it's a life-size throw rug of Turin. And it basically utilizes the theory that Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince came up with, that the shroud is an early form of a photograph. So my version is a photograph printed on a piece of cloth. And it just shows you what the image could look like. In reality, as you can see on the left-hand side picture there, it's actually very faint. The blood, which you can see is a sort of reverse number 3 there, the blood is more visible. And it wasn't until the end of the 19th century at one of the expositions then that the first ever photographs were taken of it. And when the photographs were taken, as they were developed, the photographer realized that when you looked at the negative version, you could actually see a much more clearer, more realistic face. And that's what we've got in the middle there. So that's the Shroud of Turin. We then moved on to a member who's still with the group nowadays, and this is Eddie Corey. Eddie was speaking on Robin Hood, the man, the myth, the legend. And of course, there are various opposing legends of who and what Robin Hood was. That's why I've deliberately illustrated this with archers sort of pointing their bow and arrow at each other. And this was one of those situations where we went to the Claremont Bar, having booked the room upstairs, and walked in fully expecting to set up the projector and the screen and everything upstairs so we could have our talk. And we booked a birthday party in. Sorry, so you've deliberately double booked us. Thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate that. So this talk still took place in the Claremont Bar, but it actually took place under the stairs of the Claremont Bar. And we were all cramped and we weren't able to see the pictures properly and all this sort of thing. So we were, shall we say, less than impressed by this. So the next talk took place at the Tron Cayley House rather than at the Claremont Bar. So this was our first move away from a venue. So the Tron Cayley House has a rather nice basement room, which is ideal for talks. And at that time, they weren't charging us for it. So we used that as a venue. And our first talk there was a long one. Of course it was. It was Simon Knight talking on the mystery of the pyramids. So spreading his net a little bit wider, telling us about the history of the pyramids, telling us about the mysteries associated with them, and the fact that A lot of the pyramids, you've never actually found a body inside those pyramids. So the argument that they're tombs is perhaps not as true as it may be. In 2001, there was some exciting discoveries that had just been made, which were two shafts leading out from the King's Chamber. And they were about to send a robot's camera up one of those shafts to find out where it led to. This was before that happened, and when the robot subsequently went up, it got about partway up the shaft and suddenly found that the shaft actually had a piece of stone in the middle of the shaft, blocking it off, so they weren't able to get any further. A subsequent expedition actually drilled through the stone and inserted a camera to see what they could see next. We then stuck with our chemistry demonstrations and went for Chinese alchemy with Martin Rogerson. I don't know why he specifically called it Chinese alchemy, because he just did a few alchemical things, including turning copper coins into gold coins and silver coins. So 2p pieces were turned into gold and silver coins. And if anybody kept theirs, they'll have probably found by now that the color has vanished, because of course it's not real gold and silver, it's just a chemical substitution reaction, so it's just other elements that have those particular colors. So he gave us a look-see at some of the history of alchemy there. Our next talk saw us move away from the Tron. Now, if you're thinking, hang on there, you've not given the Tron very much of a chance, you've only given them like 2 months. Well, no, actually, we got there fully expecting to have our talk there. And when we got there, we found all the staff standing outside the Tron, and the Tron in complete darkness. They'd had a complete power failure and all the electricity had gone off. So it was a case of, oh, flipping heck, where can we go to have our talk? And one of the closest pubs that we knew that had space was Bannerman's Bar. So I ran down the hill to Bannerman's, explained the situation, said, can we use one of your celery vault things? And they said, yes, no problem at all. So we decanted there and we had a talk there. And this was the first talk from Dawn Night, and this was a journey into the afterlife. So this was looking at near-death experiences, the commonality of the sort of situations that we saw there, even from different cultures around the world. For our next talk, we went back to the Tron, exactly the same photograph here, of course. And that talk was me, and I was spreading my net a little bit wider. And instead of looking just at Scottish cryptozoology, I looked at cryptozoology the world over. So I entitled it Cryptozoology 101. So I looked at just some of the most famous cryptids and just said a little bit about it. It was just a snapshot of some of the more famous cryptids. And what we did as part of that talk was we held a bit of a vote to see which cryptid people liked the best and which one they would like to have a talk about. So we decided on the basis of a vote to have a talk about a cryptid. I'm not going to say which one, give you a little bit of air of mystery. And at this point, the Tron decided that they would prefer to charge for talks in that particular venue. So we moved, and the only place we could get was back to the Claremont Bar. So Scott Russell, who'd appeared earlier on, gave us a talk on the Winchester Mansion, otherwise called What Scott Did on His Holidays. The Winchester Mansion is a mansion, surprise, surprise, just outside San Francisco. And that particular fame of this house is it was originally owned by the man who made his money from Winchester rifles, and it was subsequently his wife who took it over when he died. And his wife felt that she was visited nightly by the ghosts of the people who had been killed by the Winchester rifles. And she got the idea that if she continually added rooms and doors and windows and everything to the mansion, that the ghosts would not be able to find her, the ghosts would get confused, and she would have a life in peace. So from that moment in time until the moment she died, she continually added to the house. So when you go into it, it is a literal maze. It's got staircases going up to nowhere. It's got doors opening onto areas where there should be staircases, but there aren't. It's got doors opening onto blank walls and all sorts of things like that. There is actually a fictionalized movie called Winchester starring Helen Mirren, which looks into some of it. Obviously, it goes for the ghosts jumping out and grabbing you by the throat and evil people trying to get Widow Winchester's money and all that sort of thing. But it's a decent enough romp. Not the best thing in the world, not the worst either. Our next talk was back to Simon, and this was called Snake's Tales. I was never quite sure which spelling of Tales to use for the title of this. This is the one I went for in all the literature that we used, all the adverts that we were putting out. And Simon, still to this day, has a number of pet snakes, and he was just interested in snakes because he had a pet, had several pets, and he was just doing research about them, and he found a lot of folklore about them and tales about them. So he told us some of those tales. And in fact, I too have a pet snake, which is one of the children of one of Simon's snakes. So that's nice. That's my Bob. He's in the other room at the moment. Moving on, we have another talk from Dawn Knight, I Believe in Angels, which was just a look at myths and legends of folklore throughout the world of different aspects of angels, because a lot of religions have angels within them, but how those angels interact and what they do is potentially very different in these different regions. So Dawn was looking at some of the different aspects of angels throughout the world. We then moved on, and this talk is the first talk that was given by somebody who I did not know when the group started. So this is kind of a milestone for me. This was The Miracles and the Emergence of Maitreya, and this was a talk by Cameron Parry. Cameron is the Scottish representative or the Scottish leader of an organisation called Share International, and they exist to tell the world about the re-emergence of the world teacher. And the world teacher is this gentleman here, Maitreya, who, according to Share, has started to appear throughout the world over the past few years. And there are very few pictures of his appearances, and this is one that took place in Africa. So he appears, he gives messages of love and peace and performs miracles, and then seemingly vanishes. One of the messages that the Share International group were propagating at the time, I don't know if they still are, is that Maitreya had actually moved to the UK and was actually living in London in Brick Lane at that point. And the headquarters of Share International were in London, and I went to one of the talks that they gave there, but unfortunately Maitreya did not appear at that one. But Cameron told us about why he believes that this person is the world teacher, who these ascended masters were, what they're doing, how they impact on the world, and how we will eventually recognize Maitreya. He will appear on television. He will speak to all nations of the world in all tongues at the same time. So, this has not happened yet as far as we're aware, even though there was one person who was outed as Maitreya, but he denies it, and only a true Messiah would deny his divinity. That then brings us on to our Christmas meal. So this is our 2001 Christmas meal here. And as you can see, I'm trying to get a different picture for every single Christmas meal that we've had. I will tell you now, I fail in that mission. So that brings us on to 2002, which is not a film by anybody or a book by Arthur C. Clarke. So 2002, our first talk was Scott Russell, and that was on the Highgate Vampire. And for those who know the story of the Highgate Vampire, there are two main people who have been involved in their versions of the story. So I felt it would be only right and proper to include books from both of those individuals. So on the left of your screen, you can see The Highgate Vampire by Sean Manchester, and on the right, Beyond the Highgate Vampire by David Farrant. You'd think that these two guys, they've got this incredible interest in this story, so they'd be great friends, they'd be sharing all their research, working together, etc., etc. No. Great enemies. All sorts of court cases between the two, and these were discussed during the talk. They can't even agree on the sort of things that were happening. They both accuse each other of illegal acts, of faking all sorts of material. So an absolutely incredible tale. David Farrant has subsequently died. He only died 3 or 4 years ago, I think it is. Sean Manchester is still around. We then move on to the results of the Cryptozoology 101. So what was the cryptid that people most wanted to hear about? It was Bigfoot. So there we have it, Bigfoot or Big Hoax. And I would love to say that that photograph actually belonged to me, signed by Bob Gimlin. I'm afraid it does not. So during this talk, I looked at some of the stories about Bigfoot, some of the sightings, some of the artifacts, and I brought in one of my own Bigfoot footprints. I've got plaster replica of one of the casts from Bluff Creek, where this took place. And I also looked at the Patterson Gimlin film, which is what we've got illustrated here, and talked about some of the potential people who claimed to have been in that suit. If they were all telling the truth, it would have been a very, very crowded suit. That's all I can say about that. And looked at some of the subsequent sightings as well. Martin came back to us and again did another talk on alchemy. This one was just a more general talk on alchemy. It was basically not really anything to do with alchemy. It was basically just a lot of whiz-bang demonstrations that he had for chemistry. So it was lots of exciting experiments that looked really, really good and were very visual. So not really a fortune talk, but you know, a display of fireworks, shall we say. We then moved on, still a Doctor Who fan, but you know, we're looking at somebody who wasn't in from the early days. And this talk was looking at, were the moon landings hoaxed? And it looked at some of the evidence that people have put forward. So here's one of the pieces of evidence, a rock that supposedly has the letter C on it. And if you were to lift that rock up, the theory is that there would be a letter C on the ground underneath the rock as well. So basically the letter C there was actually just to show where that particular rock was supposed to be placed. Nothing to do with it being a hair on the photograph that had been copied by NASA. Okay, so we looked at some of the evidence, both for and against, and there's a huge cottage industry of publishing books of these sorts of things. And Debbie's conclusion at the end of it was, were the moon landings hoaxed? No, they weren't. One of the big things that would point to the moon landings not being hoaxed is we were at the height of the Cold War, and if they'd faked it, the Russians would have been following every move by radar, etc., and the Russians would have blown the the gaff on that, because that would have been massive egg on the face of the Americans. And that brings us up to April. That brings us up to our anniversary talk, which was The Riddles of the Sphinx by Simon Knight. So again, sticking with the theme that we've seen a couple of times from Simon, and also sticking with the very, very long and very interesting talks as well. And that brings us up, as I say, to our third anniversary at this point. It also brings us up to 1 hour's worth of talk. So I think that seems an appropriate moment to stop. Otherwise, I'll be in danger of wresting Simon's crown away from him as the longest length speaker. I have got much more of this talk prepared, because I did decide to prepare some of the future installments for this as well. So the fact I've stopped sort of midway through the PowerPoint was always planned. It was just a case of exactly where would I stop, depending on how much I talked, quite frankly. So there are going to be other installments of this, looking at the entire history of the Edinburgh Fortean Society. Even if we were to start meeting back in the pub next month, these talks would still go up online, because I see this as a project that that I want to get done at some point. And you know, as time goes by, we can add extra episodes when we have more talks that have taken place. I'm not planning next month as being this one. It'll be a few months before the next talk goes up. Our next talk I'm in discussion with. I've got 2 possibilities for the next talk, both of which are equally exciting. So I hope you've enjoyed that that we look at the early years of the Edinburgh Fortean Society, and there are many more talks to come. And as I say, if anyone fancies hearing any of those talks again, we could potentially, if the speakers are available. Mark Parry has, I'm afraid, subsequently died, so he's no longer available for talks. But if the speakers are available and willing, then I'll see if I can, you know, persuade them, twist their arm a little bit to give their talk, to give us back a bit of our history. So thank you very much, everyone. Has anyone got any questions or comments? Stu, you were one of the people there from day one. Is there anything you would like to say or add about those pioneering times?
No, I don't know. I can't remember half of it. Probably just through time passing and things like that. But there were the one I put in the comments that the one I would still wanted to see after all these years was the first one I missed. I think was Liam Rudden's one on the ghosts in the Playhouse. Like that would seem to be a one that was a disappointment to have missed. But yeah, I'd completely forgotten when the first time you did one of these sort of roundups that we'd been in the Tron beforehand, right? But now I kind of think back and I think, oh yes, I remember Martin setting fire to stuff downstairs in there and things like that. So yeah, that was definitely a good one. That one and the Alchemy one kind of blur together. I sort of have them together in my head because there was experiments, you know. So, yeah. But that was show and tell was good. It's certainly better than being under the stairs in the Claremont while there was parties going on upstairs. Yeah.
Yes, that was not a highlight of the that we've had, definitely. Yeah. I don't know why we went back to the Claremont. It may just have been that we couldn't get anywhere else for the time we wanted. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. Yeah. Anyone else got any comments or questions? Or has anyone seen a talk that they would like to hear?
I don't know if I still have the material for the first Shetland one. I did the Trows one again, but you know that I'm not sure about the conspiracy theory stuff again. I can certainly do that better now, I think, probably.
I would definitely have the slides for all of the ones that I did. I would have those, whether I'd have the scripts or not, I don't know. So for me, it would possibly be easier to do some of those than it is to do some of the more recent ones, because I did have a look at some of my old PowerPoints, and there are like a million generations of PowerPoint old, and the versions of software that I've got will not open them anymore. weeks. That's a bit frustrating.
I think I could probably fix that for you, but yeah,
I may well
you're
call
desperate for that.
curiosity at some point. Yeah. So as I say, that was a totally self-indulgent look at the Edinburgh Fortean Society and the history thereof. And I just thought it would be a nice way to build up towards the 25th anniversary. So, you know, I think let's have the goal of having the last of these installments to be premiered for the 25th anniversary. That seems a nice goal to aim for and totally achievable. And I'll just pop them up irrespective of talks. And this is the first one of those. So thank you for attending the inaugural meeting of the Edinburgh Fortean Society History Project, folks. Thank you very much.